Alfie's in Liverpool. Alfie, what can you tell us?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Just a bit of context for me. I'm a 22-year-old guy who's just graduated from university this summer, just gone. And my dissertation was on, actually it started on a discussion about social media, but I just ended up having to write it about sort of incel culture and how it's developed and where it sort of comes from and what the sort of solution is, because once you do begin to read into it, you begin to realise there's a much wider web of issues that all contribute to this sort of problem.
I'm sure.
Starting with, basically, there's two sort of parts to it. One is how young men find themselves in a situation where they feel the feelings that incels claim to sort of have as their sort of central motive, and then also where that turns into, because every young man at every single point in their life, you know, of any sort of any creed, sort of feels those sorts of insecurities.
Yes.
Is how that turns into aggression and violence and just the nasty side of it afterwards, because there is a fundamental difference there. It sort of starts with, if you picture the sort of life of a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old lad, or even getting older. You know, I'm 23 and I remember having social media when I was that age, but nowhere near in the capacity that it's sort of involved in the lives of young people now. It goes back to this classic thing that sex sells, and that sort of sexualized content, and not necessarily sexually explicit, but on that sort of grey area content is everywhere at the moment. And don't get me wrong, I'm not for a minute suggesting that that's the problem at all. I think that it's a good thing that we've all got so much freedom of expression, so much ability to sort of access those spaces. But if you put your mind,
it's easier to get the sense that everybody else is having loads of sex.
Yeah. Is that every single person in the world who's all over your phone screens, all over your mates' phone screens, all over your computer, on your iPad, on the YouTube content you're watching, on the TikTok you're watching, everything is, at least in some capacity, sharing a sexually explicit level of content. And again, I'm not this sort of hard-line Christian believer that you.
No, hey, listen, you don't have to justify any of this. So you pretend you're still at university, and this is I'm your tutor.
Imagine.
God help you.
Yes. I've done better than a year off COVID. It just means that when you are sat at home by yourself in bed at 10 p.m. and you should be in bed for school tomorrow, and you flick into TikTok and you just see, you know, I don't need to describe it, but lots of sort of that content, you feel, well, yeah, why am I not part of this world? Why can't I be part of this world? And then you tie that in with, you know, the insecurity that most young men feel anyway in school about their position in the social hierarchy and how sex plays into that. Yes. So all of a sudden you end up with a nation of young men who feel it's way, way more insecure about their sort of place in the sort of sexual hierarchy than they have done in generations before. And interestingly, the data sort of suggests that young people are actually having more sex than ever now, and that people are also more open about it and talking about it, which again are all good things. But unless
you're feeling left out, in which case they're worse.
Exactly. Or that's not. Well, I think a bit of the nuance here is that you're not even necessarily feeling left out because you are nervous or you don't feel confident. If you're just a normal, average 14-year-old or 15-year-old or 16-year-old, 17-year-old who just isn't having that much sex, which most 17-year-olds aren't. Yeah. It means that you feel like everyone else is, and it feels like you're missing out on this big party that's going on that you're not a part of.
And how do I then leap to hating women?
So then another thing is, so when you're on Instagram and you spend about 15, 20 minutes on a fresh account and you're using it as I was at the time as a 22-year-old man, it works out really, really quickly that I was a 22-year-old man. TikTok's even better at it than Instagram.
TikTok is
these are just two examples.
Infernal at it, right? So they know what is going to
they know exactly who
push
you
your
are,
buttons.
Really. Exactly, and because you push their buttons, right, physically, and they can then push yours. Yeah. So then, all of a sudden, when you're someone who's liking lots of sexual content, because 17-year-old lads just do that, and they realise, okay, let's put all of this in front of you, oftentimes, it's not surprising, this is how their algorithm works, there's a massive overlap between the people who want to access sexual content and the people who feel left out from it, which means that when you've got an Andrew Tate repost account or whatever, the same people who are liking all the sexual stuff are also liking all the Andrew Tate stuff, which is saying that, well, you're a young man, you deserve sex, you deserve to be involved in this culture is happening without you, there is a big sex party happening that you're not part of.
So you don't, so again, again, it's the mythical conspiracy. It's the idea. Okay, that's it then.
And the word is a grifter, right? It's pretending that you're there to support the young men when actually you're there for a paycheck, and saying that being able to provide the answer to an insecurity that people have that's fundamentally founded on a myth is really, really profitable in the age of such vicious and successful algorithms that can identify people.
What are the components of the myth? So, you know, obviously for me, the thing I reach for as an example of how easily people can be conned is usually Brexit, and I'm fairly good on telling you things that people believe that aren't true. What would be the components of the incel myth, for example?
Sure. So the fundamental idea is that it's sort of as the last caller was saying, is that this is a women problem. It's the problem isn't about you being able to identify your own reality and identify the sort of parts of your personality that you might want to change if you want to change the output of your lifestyle.
Right.
But it's actually more so that it's people are withholding this from you, that you deserve it and it's a right that belongs to you, just like everyone is, just like you see all the influencers doing on the internet. Everyone wants to be like an influencer, and a big part of that is the lifestyle that they permit. And I also think that the other sort of proponents of this myth is that, it's an entitlement thing. And that
this is back to the days when women weren't allowed to say no.
Exactly.
That's when that's the point at which it gets horrible.
Which is where the sort of Andrew Tate anti-feminism thing...
Well, let me read you something. I'm going to read you two things. One for reference, and the second one, just whether or not, as a result of your thesis, you can give any help to Stephen in Dundee.
Sure.
So the first one is anonymous. I have a best friend of 10 years who I met at university. He was once extremely liberal and lefty, like myself. However, after being single for many years, he's turned to Andrew Tate as a role model. Most recently, he was telling me that women bear some responsibility for being sexually assaulted or raped. As a rape and sexual assault victim, it broke me to hear this and resulted in me taking some time away from the friendship. He still today believes he was, quotes, cancelled by his best friends for this. It's terribly sad. That sounds like a textbook case of what you've been describing.
Absolutely.
And it escalates then, of course, because the victimhood gets magnified by the reactions of...
And they become more isolated, and the people the person who's texted you would be the person to intervene in that life, but because it's so difficult and triggering for them, there's no one there then. They've isolated themselves.
Okay, and now this is where you might be able to help. I don't know. This is from Steve.
Sure.
He says, my 14-year-old son's doing really well in school. He seems to have plenty of friends. Girls seem to like him. He's sporty, all of which seems really positive, but he becomes defensive and gets very moody when challenged even lightly on Andrew Tate and the views and teachings that he is showing to young boys. He believes he doesn't listen to the bad bits about women and sexism, but Andrew Tate is innocent and has done nothing wrong and is part of the inspiration for him going to the gym and getting himself fit. It's really difficult to counter, James, as they watch it on social media and it slips past without even knowing it's going on. Hopefully he sees through it, but it's really concerning. That's textbook, but much earlier in the case.
Absolutely,
What can he do? Can he do anything, do you think?
Yeah, I think we can, right? I'm hopeful after my thesis. I wasn't when going into it, but now I'm hopeful there's a solution. Totally. It's not going to, no one's going to be surprised to hear that this is the answer from my perspective, but I think you just need to talk to your kids and sort of from a much younger age. I think we have a big issue in this country particularly, but also around the world, and this is changing over time, where we're beginning to learn that having conversations with kids about sort of sexual health and sexual well-being is really important from a young age. And because it's taboo, and I remember my sex ed classes in school, and they just weren't fit for purpose.
Mine was from a celibate monk, mate. So I don't think I'm going to win this encounter.
Well, my PSHE teacher might agree with you, to be honest. But yeah, it's just making sure that young men, when they're like, not after they've already been presented with the Andrew Tate stuff, because then talking to them, the big thing about Andrew Tate is he says that anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is part of the machine or the matrix or whatever.
Yeah, of course.
So it's not about dealing with it once they've already begun on that slide. It's about making sure that this is why I think I'm in such a good position to sort of understand this from an objective perspective, is that my parents made this effort with me when I was very young.
Right.
Just understand that when you are poised with those ideas, as intoxicating as they can be and as much as they sound right and they answer all your questions, you actually just have to look at it a bit critically and try and understand why that person might be. And again, this would solve our Brexit problem, it would solve our Tory problem, it would solve our misogyny problem. Addressing it at a young age with men and being like, look, we need to talk about these things before it becomes a problem in their lives. It means that then we're going to have a generation of men who are it feels sad to say that this is the baseline of what we're aiming for, but a generation of men who are critical thinkers and women and whoever, but specific to this conversation.
Well, it's susceptibility to grifters. I mean, it's why you just gave us the litany, the list of grifts, because that is, So I mean, that's really helpful. It's great that you're more optimistic than you were going in, but the problem is getting bigger, right, at the moment. Or do you think that the exposure of Tate now in a much more mainstream way will actually diffuse some of his strength?
As someone who, unfortunately for me, has been chronically online since I was about 15, Tate being the biggest thing in the world at the moment is a good thing for the culture and for the conversation. But Andrew Tate isn't the first person to have been doing this. There's been a line of people exactly like him, some worse, some not quite as severe, behind him. And there's a line queuing up behind him because back in the day when it wasn't even that profitable to be like this, just to have the internet clout alone was reason to do it.
Clout.
And now all of a sudden you've got a massive paycheck at the end of the line as well for people. There's a huge queue of people looking to be the Andrew Tate role in kids' lives. And I think we also have to ask ourselves a little bit why Andrew Tate was so popular. Part of it is because young men are lacking really good, positive role models at the moment. I think that's because we live in a culture where everyone seems to disagree everywhere, and there's no one answer. And I think your dad becomes a point, or your mum, indeed, but your parental figure seems to be that boring loser at home who tells you to go to bed early. You're not going to listen to them about sort of bigger issues that other cool people on social media who you're staying up to watch are telling you, right? And it means that we've got to make sure that as people and as people putting our output into the world, we are good role models for young men who can access. It's like I was saying, that person who became so isolated because all their friends just didn't want to associate with them anymore. All of a sudden, who is there in their life to tell and challenge them? There's no one. So then they're just free falling through this rabbit hole. And as you know, as the calls have said before, and as we know with all forms of extremism, once you're in and there's no one there to challenge it, it is an absolute free fall, and you find yourself at the bottom very quickly, and you find yourself with domestic terrorists who are happy to take action violent, and I mean, and that can be as far as, making a woman feel uncomfortable by the way they talk to her, all the way up to actual violence. It means that we have this horrible problem on our hands.
Or victim blaming as well as a sort of entry level offence. Entry level offence. What did you get in your degree?
I got 2-1.
You're joking. You were robbed. They were absolutely robbed.
You're telling me. You're telling me, mate.
Get me a professor on the line now. This is outrageous. Discrimination. Well done.
To be fair, James, I only went to 3 lectures in my last year. I absolutely swerved it. So to take the 2, I'll absolutely take it.
Take the win.
I took a leaf out of your book, mate. BS and our way to the end.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Alfie. We'll talk again, I sense. I look forward to it as well. It's 12:46.